Hello and welcome in to another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm your host, Trevor Scott, doing a solo episode today and going to get after some trade targets. We're going to start with some buy lows, and then we're going to move on to some guys that you can also sell high on. My first buy low is not going to be a popular one again, but we're going back to Dak Prescott. He just got hurt. He should be out for multiple weeks with this hamstring injury. I would guess that he's going to be an IR candidate. So all of that said, he should be dirt cheap in Superflex. And if he does come back over the last 5-6 weeks of the season, he could be very, very productive in your starting lineups against a really easy schedule. So an example trade I was thinking, I think that you could possibly pull off is if you have Derek Carr, who just came back from injury, pair him with a receiver like Cortland Sutton to get Dak. Those are both likely bench guys for you in your Superflex leagues. And if you can do that, stash Dak on your IR until he's back. Maybe add Cooper Rush. I think that could be something that's good for your Superflex teams. The second guy I want to talk about is CJ Stroud. He was awful again, but that was predictable. Again, down weapons against a difficult defense, short week. There was just a lot working against Stroud. And this week, we expect Nico to be back. We did kind of get a wishy-washy answer from the coach, so I'm not entirely sure Nico's going to be back in week 10, but he should be back soon. And once he is, I think Stroud is right back to being a pretty locked-in top 10 quarterback, and the chances that he's viewed that way are not very high anymore at this point. So if you can get him below that value, I think you're going to be doing good for yourself. I think you could try and turn like Jared Goff, maybe with a Rico Dowdle, who just had a really good game, into CJ Stroud, and that's something that I would be looking to do in fantasy at this point in the year. Next guy down is Jameis Winston. He just had 10 points, so that was a good call. Shout out to Matt for having him as a sit. And he's going on bye this week. So you should, again, this is a guy that you should be able to acquire cheaply in your Superflex leagues. I would try to get him without giving up a quarterback. If you can go and get him in that situation, I think that's probably worth it. Like if you can trade a Calvin Ridley for him straight up, if the team that has Winston really needs a win and needs wide receiver help, Josh Downs, Travis Etienne, Javonte Williams, who we'll also talk about later in this video. I think that level of player, if you can get Winston for one of those guys, even if one of those guys is in your starting lineup, I think over the second half of the year, it should be good to have Winston as that Superflex option on your bench, or possibly a starter down the stretch, because we all know Winston can really rack up points quickly when he's on, and a lot of garbage time too, right? We even saw it against the Chargers this week. It was looking like he was going to have a really bad week, and then he ends up with a touchdown in the last drive. Almost had a touchdown in the second to last drive. Like, it really could have been even better than this for Winston. So use the bye week, use the down game to try and get him cheap. The last quarterback I want to mention here is Anthony Richardson. Flacco looked terrible. They came out and gave him the dreaded vote of confidence and said look, Flacco's going to start for us the rest of the year. But I mean, I guess that's the case. I mean, why would they commit to that? If they lose their next two games, I mean, they have a tough matchup against Buffalo and a tough matchup against the Jets. And then week 12, they go into Detroit. And I think that he could be back and starting by then. If he's not, they lose to Detroit too. They lose 3 straight games with Flacco as the quarterback. What's the point at that point? I don't know. I wouldn't understand that organizationally. They should go back to Richardson at that point. So I could see a situation where he's the starter by the end of the year, by the playoff time. And so if you can get him now for borderline nothing, right? If maybe he gets dropped in your league, go add him at the end of your bench. If somebody's hanging on to him and has Flacco or whatever, offer him. Again, this is borderline nothing to acquire him. If they want something of substantial value or something like I just recommended for Winston, obviously you're not doing that. But if you can get something end of bench type of player, I think that you should be looking at trying to acquire Richardson if you need quarterback help. The first running back I want to talk about here, we've mentioned him before, and I didn't know if there was going to be a buying opportunity on Breece Hall again this year, but here it is. I mean, this is probably going to be your last chance to get him, right? I mean, we are going into week 10. So if you haven't gotten Breece Hall, but you've talked to the owner, threw out a couple offers, and you're kind of getting dismissed, now's the time to go back to them, right? He has back-to-back 9-point games in half PPR. Braylon Allen is getting more involved again, which we were kind of hoping that was going to be off the table. And then Garrett Wilson and Davante Adams both kind of went off in this game. Both had over 90 yards, both scored. So, maybe you can kind of sell look, the Jets are really going to try and pass the ball in a big way to try and open up their offense here. And Breece isn't going to be as much of the focal point. If you can sell somebody on that, I would go ahead and try again. He has one of the best playoff schedules in the league. If you are a contender, if you want to get him on your team, And again, you have to pay up, right? So something I did, like a mock trade that you could do, if you have like a Josh Jacobs level running back and a Terry McLaurin level receiver, like a borderline 1 and a borderline 1, and go up and get Breece Hall, I think that's something you want to do, especially for like Terry McLaurin replacement. If you just added Cedric Tillman, or you have Roma Dunze, who you've been waiting for, and he looked good this week, like this is something where you can kind of give up 2 starters and try and get Breece Hall. The next running back I want to talk about is Tyrone Tracy. This is my trade target of the week. I really think that this is going to be the last chance you can try to acquire him, right, going into week 10. They play Carolina this week, so the price might be higher, but the only tough matchup left on his schedule is Baltimore in week 15. I know that's the first week of the playoffs, so it's a little bit tough, but the rest of the games, he has good matchups. He's going to be productive. He's getting all of the work. He came off that concussion, immediately back to 70+% of the targets. He didn't get a lot of passing game work in this one, so maybe that's another thing you can use to try to push him into a trade. But I think he's really somebody that you want to try and acquire now before it's too late. I didn't know, again, if after he torched Pittsburgh, I wasn't sure there was going to be another buying window here, but now he had a bad game. So, you got to try and do what you can here with Tyrone Tracy. A couple of trades I thought, Nick Chubb and Jalen Waddle for Tracy. If you can get that done on name value, I think that's for sure worth it to go get him. And, some guys that are actually producing a little better but have a little less name value are Austin Eckler and Ladd McConkey, right? McConkey had two pretty good weeks. If it's the team that has Tracy needs receiver help and picked up Tracy and doesn't exactly need the running back help, I think that's a good buying opportunity with a player like McConkey, who's looked great over the last 2 weeks. So, again, those probably don't inspire a lot of confidence from like the guys I'm saying to go get Tracy. If you have to give up a little bit more, I might even try to do that, but that's kind of where I would start negotiations. Moving down to my top wide receiver here, this is Drake London. He has a hip pointer injury. He is questionable at best for this week, but I think too, he's got a buying window because he has back-to-back down games. He has 5 and then left this game early after scoring and only had 9 points. Coming in with a strong offer after these down weeks, after he has an injury, I think there's a pretty good chance that you can actually get him. It was looking like you weren't going to be able to, when he was kind of locked into the top 10 of production and in rankings, right? He had that 12 for like 150 plus game and a touchdown. And it was like, okay, here, London has arrived. But now, a couple down weeks, injury, go and you have to make a competitive offer. They're not just going to give away Drake London, whoever has him in your league. So this might seem like a lot, but it's Brian Thomas Jr. and David Montgomery for Drake London, right? Both very productive players that you'd have to be giving up likely out of your starting lineups. But again, I think the London production plus whoever you can plug in after David Montgomery or after Brian Thomas Jr. in your flex spot is going to be worth it down the stretch. He can be super, super productive. The next guy I want to talk about is Marvin Harrison Jr. He's coming off a terrible game, and the next 2 weeks aren't going to be very good, right? He gets the Jets, and he gets a bye after that. So that's your buying window right there, right? Bad game, bad schedule in the next couple of weeks. If somebody that has Harrison needs wins, this should be somebody that you can try to get. And there seems to be this like negative value around him. And I don't know that that should be the case. He's got a great schedule coming up out of the bye, including in the fantasy playoffs. He gets New England, Carolina, and the Rams. That is about as good of a schedule as you can get when he should be playing his best football. So I do think that he is worth trying to go get. And if you can give up somebody like Kupp and Najee to go up and get Marvin Harrison Jr., I think I'd be doing that right now. And you might even be able to just get it done for Kupp. But if somebody that has Marvin Harrison Jr. really, really likes him or knows that schedule is coming up, I think that that's still a reasonable price to be able to go and get him. So if you can do something like that, I would be looking into doing that now as a contender for Marvin Harrison Jr. The last guy I want to talk about as a buy is David Njoku. So he just had a down week, and we've seen Cedric Tillman step up into just like wide receiver 1 status. He has the most fantasy points over the last 3 weeks amongst receivers. Cedric Tillman does. And David Njoku has kind of suffered production-wise a little bit from that, but even still, he's had 14, 7, and 7 targets, and this past week was his worst game. So I do think that there's a buying window here. Maybe you can do something where if you have Goff, you can try and use him in a Superflex league to get Njoku, right? And get like Njoku and Carr for Goff. That's the only trade I'm going to say where you give up 1 and get 2 back. But generally with a tight end, that's kind of how those trades are going to have to work. You're going to have them be added into a trade. It's hard to do like a 1-for-1 trade for tight ends, just because they're difficult to value. Or you could do something where it's like tight end for tight end and you throw somebody in, so you can do like a Tyler Kraft and Keenan Allen, maybe, who just had 10 targets for David Njoku. I think maybe something like that. Again, that one's a little tougher because you're not giving up much on top of Kraft to go up and get Njoku. Probably pretty happy with the production you've been getting from Kraft. But David Njoku, I do think, is going to be a top 5 tight end once he comes out of his bye week, which is another potential buying opportunity, as he is on his bye going into week 10. And so I do really like him over the rest of the season and think that he should be very productive. Going into a couple sell highs now, right? So these guys are a little bit more difficult because you kind of have to sell them once they have a huge game and they have a decent schedule coming up. So they're a little bit difficult to sell, right? But my first guy that I want to talk about is Joe Burrow. If you have him in a Superflex league, he just threw 5 touchdowns and none of them went to Chase. I don't know that his value could be higher than it is right now. Especially in Superflex leagues, he's going to be like ranked very highly. He's coming off of a really good game. I really think that you can get a lot for him. Again, you're not just giving him away, but you're looking to get something big, right? And so my suggestion here would be to pair Burrow with like an Eckler who just had a big game, or at receiver, maybe a Jacoby Myers who just had a big game, and go up and try and get Jaden Daniels. I think in Superflex, maybe there's a situation where the Jaden Daniels owner is not in the playoffs right now, or where they might need help because of injury. They'll take on another player and they still feel like they're getting an elite quarterback back. And Daniels, I think, will just be better than him over the rest of the season. Daniels hasn't been that good over his last couple games, but I do think he's trying to protect himself a little bit with the injury. And as he gets healthier, I think we're going to see his rushing production increase. And I still think that they could possibly add a receiver at the deadline. So if they do that, that could be huge. Moving over to the running back position now, the first guy I want to talk about is Chase Brown. I'm not sure you could sell higher than this. I mean, he had an unbelievable game. He had 27 carries. I didn't think he even had that in him. And so Moss is also out indefinitely. So if somebody thinks that's going to be his role in the offense, I think you might be able to sell like really, really high on him right now. Like Moss is out. He's getting all the work. He looked unbelievable. He scored a receiving touchdown. There's just so many things working in his favor. He had 4 receptions on top of that, right? He had over 30 touches. So this is a guy that I would want to like shoot for the stars with, right? If you have Brown, you have a starter now. But again, not to use Kupp as an example again, but if you could pair like Chase Brown with Cooper Kupp and go get Kenneth Walker, go get Devon Achane or something like that, and really shoot for the stars and to improve that running back spot. Or, you could even try and go up at receiver too, but I'd be more inclined to try and get a star running back with Brown, because I do feel like filling his spot is going to be difficult at this point. So that would be my suggestion is target one of those guys that are in like the top 5 running backs and use one of your better receivers to try and go up and get him. And again, same type of deal. If you have Ladd McConkey who's coming on, or you have Rome Odunze who's been coming on, or you have Cedric Tillman who's been coming on, that can kind of fill that spot that you'd be losing with Kupp, and you could turn Brown into Walker in your starting lineup. That's definitely something that I feel is a very high value move. The second running back is not a sell high as much as he is just a sell, get off your roster, and that's Javonte Williams. We got news that Audric Estime is going to get an expanded role. He just had 5 for 35 against Baltimore. That's 7 a carry. He looked pretty good. So his role, even if it takes 5 to 8 carries away from Javonte, I think is a pretty big deal, because Javonte hasn't been getting a ton of volume as it is anyways. So, that isn't good. We know McLaughlin is still going to be getting touches in this backfield too. So if it's 3-headed monster, you don't want Javonte. Like, you need to try and get whatever you can for him now. He also has tough matchups ahead. I mean, they just played Baltimore and he didn't do very well. Now they get Kansas City, and it's just like, okay, if you can get anything for him at this point, I would be trying to do it and try and tack him on to a trade as like a sweetener almost. So the couple trades that I suggest is like, if you have Rome Odunze, attach him with Rome Odunze to try and get Cedric Tillman. I think that could be a reasonable trade offer, and I think something that's worth it. And Tillman's on bye, so especially if that team has been starting him, needs replacements this week, he might be interested in that. Or, if you want to make a bigger level trade where maybe he's enough to kick in, you have Malik Neighbors and Javonte for Kyron Williams. I think Kyron Williams is really going to be a league winner down the stretch. He has one of the easiest running back schedules in the playoffs. And so I think he could be somebody that's really good to target as well. JSN, can't have a bigger game than what JSN just had. He had 7 for 180 and 2 touchdowns. He was phenomenal. But, right, he's going into his bye, and then DK Metcalf is supposed to be back after the bye. So, not to, be the no fun zone, but I'm going to pour some cold water on this one. You should be trying to trade him as high as you can. So I had a couple 2 wide receivers for 1 type of thing. Maybe try and consolidate JSN with one of your starters to go get a better player. So my thought here was to get JSN with Javonte Smith and try and go get Nico Collins, who should be back. And if Nico Collins, we get word that he's not going to play, maybe they're even more inclined to do that. This week, if Collins is going to be out, they can play Javonte Smith and they have JSN off a bye after that. That could be something that works out logistically, and Nico is shooting for the stars. I know that. And maybe they don't view Javonte Smith as enough juice to go up and get Collins, but I think he is personally. So that's where I would start. And then if you want to try and consolidate bench spots for a starter, I do think Jordan Addison and JSN, JSN just went off and Jordan Addison just looked like he's kind of back a part of the offense, had a touchdown. So if you can take those guys, maybe you've been kind of debating flex between them type of thing, and you can consolidate them into a Jaden Reed or that level of receiver, somewhere in that 10 to 15 range of receiver, I would like that move a lot as well. The last guy I want to talk about here is Zay Flowers. Okay, he just had a 2 TD performance and over 100 yards. He's had over 100 yards in 4 of his last 5 games. And I think you should be able to get something really good from him at this point, right? He is a little boom bust, but there's been a lot more boom lately. But I do think Deontay is going to, as he gets caught up in the offense, is going to start taking quite a bit of work from Flowers. I know there's been mixed reports on what's actually going to happen, but I think Deontay's in a really good spot here to make a move. So I would be trying to get off Zay Flowers again for something very good. So a guy we talked about above was Drake London, right, to try and go buy him. If you have Flowers, this is another great example for a London trade and to trade Zay Flowers, is try and trade Flowers with a James Cook, who's been a little bit underwhelming. He had that one good game, but, Ray Davis again in there on a catch and run for a touchdown was a little frustrating. So, if you have somebody else like a Chase Brown on your bench and you can kind of plug him into your running back 2 spot, and you can get off James Cook and turn that into Drake London, Flowers and Cook for London, I personally would be very much trying to do something like that if I had Zay Flowers. All right, and with that, thank you guys so much for listening. Hopefully some of this trade advice helps you guys make some moves going into Week 10 and prep your lineups for the fantasy playoffs. We look forward to talking to you guys in the next one.